The Ugly Chickens by Howard Waldrop. My car was broken and I had a class to teach at 11, so I took the city bus, something I rarely do. I spent last summer crawling through the big thicket with cameras and tape recorder, photographing and taping two of the last ivory-billed woodpeckers on the earth. You can see the films at your local Audubon Society showroom. This year I wanted something just as flashy but a little less taxing. Perhaps a population study on the Bermuda Caho or the New Zealand Takahe. A month or so in the warm, not hot sun would do me a world of good, to say nothing of the advance of science. I was idly leafing through Greenway's extinct and vanishing birds of the world. The city bus was winding its way through the ritzy neighborhoods of Austin, stopping to let off the Chicanas, black women, and Vietnamese who tended the kitchens and gardens of the rich. "I haven't seen any of those ugly chickens in a long time," said a voice close by. A gray-haired lady was leaning across the aisle toward me. I looked at her, then around. Maybe she was a shopping bag lady. Maybe she was just talking. I looked straight at her. No doubt about it, she was talking to me. She was waiting for an answer. "I used to live near some folks who raised them when I was a girl," she said. She pointed. I looked down at the page my book was open to. What I should have said was, "That is quite impossible, madam. This is a drawing of an extinct bird of the island of Mauritius. It is perhaps the most famous dead bird in the world. Maybe you are mistaking this drawing for that of some rare Asiatic turkey, peafowl, or pheasant. I am sorry, but you are mistaken." I should have said all that. What she said was, "Oops, this is messed up," and got up to go. My name is Paul Lindbergh. I am 26 years old, a graduate student in ornithology at the University of Texas, a teaching assistant. My name is not unknown in the field. I have several vices and follies, but I don't think foolishness is one of them. The stupid thing for me to do would have been to follow her. She stepped off the bus. I followed her. I came into the departmental office, trailing scattered papers in the whirlwind behind me. "Martha! Martha!" I yelled. She was doing something in the supply cabinet. "Jesus, Pa, what do you want?" "Where's Courtney?" "At the conference in Houston, you know that. You missed your class. What's the matter?" "Petty cash, let me at it." "Payday was only a week ago. If you can't—" "It's business. It's fame and adventure and the chance of a lifetime. It's a long sea voyage that leaves a plane ticket to either Jackson, Mississippi or Memphis. Make it Jackson, it's closer. I'll get receipts. I'll be famous. Courtney will be famous. You'll even be famous. This university will make even more money. I'll pay you back. Give me some paper. Gotta write Courtney a note. When's the next plane out? Can you get Marie and Chuck to take over my classes Tuesday and Wednesday? I'll try to be back Thursday unless something happens. Courtney will be back tomorrow, right? I'll call him from, well, wherever. Do you have some coffee?" And so on and so forth. Martha looked at me like I was crazy, but she filled out the requisition anyway. "What do I tell Kimijian when I asked him to sign these?" "Martha, babe, sweetheart. Tell him I'll get his picture in Scientific American. He doesn't read that." "Nature, then." "I'll see what I can do," she said. The lady I had followed off the bus was named Jolene Smith Jimson. The story she told me was so weird that it had to be true. She knew things only an expert or someone with first-hand experience could know. I got names from her and addresses and directions and tidbits information, plus a year, 1927, and a place, northern Mississippi. I gave her my copy of the Greenway book. I told her I'd call her as soon as I got back into town. I left her standing on the corner near the house of the lady she cleaned for twice a week. Jolene Jimson was in her 60s. Think of the dodo as a baby harp seal with feathers. I know, that's not even close, but it saves time. In 1507, the Portuguese, on their way to India, found the then unnamed Mascarene Islands in the Indian Ocean, 3 of them a few hundred miles apart, all east and north of Madagascar. It wasn't until 1598, when that old Dutch sea captain Cornelius van Neck bumped into them, that the islands received their names. Names which changed several times through the centuries as the Dutch, French, and English changed them every war or so. They are now known as Rodriguez, Réunion, and Mauritius. The major feature of these islands were large flightless birds, stupid, ugly, bad-tasting birds. Van Neck and his men named them Dood Arsen, stupid ass, or Dodars, silly birds, or solitaires. There were 3 species. The dodo of Mauritius, the real gray-brown, hook-beaked, clumsy thing that weighed 20 kilos or more, the white, somewhat slimmer dodo of Réunion, and the solitaires of Rodriguez and Réunion, which looked like very fat, very dumb, light-colored geese. The dodos all had thick legs, big squat bodies twice as large as a turkey's, naked faces, and big long down-curved beaks ending in a hook like a hollow linoleum knife. They were flightless. Long ago they had lost the ability to fly, and their wings had degenerated to flaps the size of a human hand, with only 3 or 4 feathers in them. Their tails were curly and fluffy, like a child's afterthought at decoration. They had absolutely no natural enemies. They nested on open ground. They probably hatched their eggs wherever they happened to lay them. No natural enemies until Van Neck and his kind showed up. The Dutch, French, and Portuguese sailors who stopped at the masquerades to replenish stores found that besides looking stupid, dodos were stupid. They walked right up to them and hit them on the head with clubs. Better yet, dodos could be herded around like sheep. Ship's logs are full of things like party of 10 men ashore, drove half 100 of the big turkey-like birds into the boat, brought to ship where they are given the run of decks. There will feed a crew of 150. Even so, most of the dodo, except for the breast, tasted bad. One of the Dutch words for them was Waagvogel, disgusting bird. But on a ship 3 months out on a return from Goa to Lisbon, well, food was where you found it. It was said, even so, that prolonged boiling did not improve the flavor. That being said, the dodos might have lasted, except that the Dutch, and later the French, colonized the Mascarenes. These islands became plantations and places for religious refugees, and other exotic crops were raised there. With the colonists came cats, dogs, hogs, and the cunning Rattus norvegius, and the rhesus monkey from Ceylon. What dodos the hungry sailors left were chased down. They were dumb and stupid, but they could run when they felt like it, by dogs in the open. They were killed by cats as they sat on their nests. Their eggs were stolen and eaten by monkeys, rats, and hogs, and they competed with the pigs for all low-growling goodies of the islands. The last Mauritius dodo was seen in 1681, less than 100 years after man first saw them. The last white dodo walked off the history books around 1720. The solitaires of Rodriguez and Réunion, the last of the genus as well as the species, may have lasted until 1790. Nobody knows. Scientists suddenly looked around and found no more of the Didine birds alive, anywhere. This part of the country was degenerate before the first Snopes ever saw it. This road hadn't been paved until the late 50s and was a main road between 2 county seats. That didn't mean it went through civilized country. I'd travel for miles and see nothing but dirt banks red as Billy Carter's neck and an occasional church. I expected to see Burma shave signs, but realized this road had probably never had them. I almost missed the turnoff onto the dirt and gravel road that the man back at the service station had marked. It led onto the highway from nowhere, a lane out of a field. I turned down it, and a rock the size of a golf ball flew up over the hood and put a crack 3 inches long in the windshield of the rent-a-car I'd gotten in Granada. It was a hot, muggy day for this early. The view was obscured in a cloud of dust every time the gravel thinned. About a mile down the road, the gravel gave out completely. The roadway turned into a roughed earth pathway, just wider than the car, hemmed in on both sides by a sagging 3-strand barbed wire fence. In some places, the fence posts were missing for a few meters. The wire lay on the ground and in some places disappeared under it for long stretches. The only life I saw was a mockingbird raising hell with something under a thorn bush the barbed wire had been nailed to in place of a post. To one side now was a grassy field which had gone wild, the way everywhere will look after we blow ourselves off the face of the planet. The other was fast becoming woods, pine, oak, some black gum and wild plum, fruit not out at this time of year. I began to ask myself what I was doing here. What if Miss Jimison were some imaginative old crank who... But no. Wrong maybe, but even the wrong was worth checking. But I knew she hadn't lied to me. She'd seemed incapable of lies, good old girl, backbone of the South, of the earth. not a mendacious gland in her being. I couldn't doubt her, or my judgment either. Here I was, creeping and bounding down a dirt path in Mississippi, after no sleep for a day, out on the thin, ragged edge of a dream. I had to take it on faith. The back of the car sometimes slid where the dirt had loosened and gave way to sand. The back tire stuck once, but I rocked out of it. Getting back out again would be another matter. Didn't anyone ever use this road? The woods in on both sides like the forest primeval, and the fence had long since disappeared. My odometer said 6 miles, and it had been 20 minutes since I turned off the highway. In the rearview mirror I saw beads of sweat and dirt in the wrinkles of my neck. A fine patina of dust covered everything inside the car. Clots of it came through the windows. The woods reached out and swallowed the road. Branches scraped against the windows and the top. It was like falling down a long, dark, leafy tunnel. It was dark and green in there. I fought back an atavistic urge to turn on the headlights. The roadbed must have been made of a few centuries of leaf mulch. I kept constant pressure on the accelerator and bowled my way through. Half a log caught and banged and clanged against the car bottom. I saw light ahead. Fearing for the oil pan, I punched the pedal and sped out. I almost ran through a house. It was maybe 10 yards from the trees. The road ended under one of the windows. I saw somebody waving from the corner of my eye. I slammed on the brakes. A whole family was on the porch, looking like a Walker Evans depression photograph or a fever dream from the mind of a hee-haw producer. The house was old. Strips of peeling paint a yard long tapped against the eaves. "Damn good thing you stopped," said a voice. I looked up. The biggest man I had ever seen in my life leaned down into the driver's side window. "If we'd have heard you sooner, I'd have sent one of the kids down to the end of the driveway to warn you," he said. Driveway? His mouth was stained brown at the corners. I figured he chewed tobacco until I saw the sweet gum snuff brush sticking from the pencil pocket in the bib of his overalls. His hands were the size of catcher's mitts. They looked like they'd never held anything smaller than an axe handle. "Oh, y'all," he said by way of introduction. "Just fine," I said. I got out of the car. "My name's Lindbergh," I said, extending my hand. He took it. For an instant I thought of bear traps, sharks' mouths, closing elevator doors. The thought went back to wherever it is they stay. "Is this the Gudger place?" I asked. He looked at me blankly with his gray eyes. He wore a diesel truck cap and had on a checked lumberjack shirt beneath his overalls. His rubber boots were the size of the ones Karloff wore in Frankenstein. "No, I'm Jim Bob Crate. That's my wife, Jenny. There's Luke and Skino and Cheryl." He pointed to the porch. The people on the porch nodded. "Let's see, Gudger. No Gudgers around here I know of. I'm sort of new here." I took that to mean he hadn't lived here for more than 20 years or so. "Jennifer," he yelled, "you know of anybody named Gudger?" To me he said, "My wife's lived around here all her life." His wife came down on the second step of the porch landing. "I think they used to be the ones what lived in Spradlin Place before the Spradlins, but the Spradlins left around the Korean War. I don't know the Gudgers myself. That's why we was living over to Water Valley." "You an insurance man?" asked Mr. Crate. No," I said. I imagined the people on the porch leaning towards me all ears. I teach college." "Oxford?" asked Crate. No, University of Texas." "Well, that's a long way off. You say you're looking for the Gudgers." "Just their house. The area. As your wife said, I understand they left during the Depression, I believe." "Well, they must have had money," said the gigantic Mr. Crate. "Nobody around here was rich enough to leave during the Depression." "Luke!" he yelled. The oldest boy on the porch sauntered down. He looked anemic and wore a shirt in vogue with the twist. He stood with his hands in his pockets. "Luke, show Mr. Lindbergh." "Lindbergh." "Mr. Lindbergh here the way up to the old Spradlin place. Take him as far as the old log bridge. You might get lost before then." "Log bridge broke down, Daddy." "When?" "October, Daddy." "Well, here's something else to fix. Anyway, to the creek." He turned to me. "You want him to go along on up there? See you don't get snake bit." "No, I'm sure I'll be fine." "Mind if I ask what you're going up there for?" he asked. He was looking away from me. I could see having to come right out and ask was bothering him. Such things usually came up in the course of conversation. I'm a bird scientist. I study birds. We had a sighting. Someone told us the old Gudger place, the area around here. I'm looking for a rare bird. It's hard to explain. I noticed I was sweating. It was hot. You mean like a good guide? I saw a good guide about 25 years ago over next to Bruce, he said. Well, no. A good guide was one of the names for an ivory-billed woodpecker, one of the rarest in the world. Any other time I would have dropped my jaw, because they were thought to have died out in Mississippi by the teens, and by the fact that Creighton knew they were rare. I went to lock my car up, then thought of the protocol of the situation. My car be in your way? I asked. No, it'll be just fine, said Jim Bob Crate. We'll look for you back by sundown. That be all right? For a minute, I didn't know whether that was a command or an expression of concern. Just in case I get snake bit, I said. I'll try to be careful up there. Good luck on finding rare birds, he said. He walked up to the porch with his family. Let's go, said Luke. Behind the Crate house was a hen house and a pigsty where hogs lay after their morning slop like islands in a muddy bay or some Zen pork sculpture. Next, we passed broken farm machinery gone to rust, though there was nothing but uncultivated land as far as the eye could see. How the family made a living, I don't know. I'm told you can find places just like this throughout the South. We walked through the woods and across fields, following a sort of path. I tried to memorize the turns I would have to take on the way back. Luke didn't say a word the whole 20 minutes he accompanied me, except to curse once when he stepped into a bullnell with his tennis shoes. We came to a creek which skirted the edge of a woodsy hill. There was a rotted log forming a small dam. Above it, the water was nearly 3 feet deep. Below it, half that much. See that path? He asked. Yes. Follow it up round the hill, then across the next field. Then you cross the creek again on the rocks and over the hill. Take the left-hand path. What's left of the house is about 3/4 of the way up the next hill. If you come to a big bare rock cliff, you've gone too far. You got that? I nodded. He turned and left. The house had once been a dog run cabin, like Miss Jimson had said. Now it was fallen in on one side, what they call Sigoglin, or was it anti-Sigoglin? I once heard a hymn on the radio called The Land Where No Cabins Fall. This was the country songs like that were written in. Weeds grew everywhere. There were signs of fences, a flattened pile of wood that had once been a barn. Further behind the house were the outhouse remains. Half a rusted pump stood in the backyard. A flatter spot showed where the vegetable garden had been. In it a single wild tomato, pecked by birds, lay rotting. I passed it. There was a lumber from 3 outbuildings, mostly rotten and green with algae and moss. One had been a smokehouse and woodshed combination. 2 had been chicken roosts. One was larger than the other. It was there I started to poke around and dig. Where? Wish I'd been on more archaeological digs. Knew the places to look. Refuse piles, midden heaps, kitchen scrap piles, compost boxes. Why hadn't I been born on a farm so I know instinctively where to search? I prodded around the grounds. I moved back and forth like a setter casting for the scent of quail. I wanted more. I still wasn't satisfied. Dusk. Dark, in fact. I trudged into the Crate's front yard. The tow sack I carried was full to bulging. I was hot, tired, streaked with 50 years of chicken shit. The Crates were on their porch. Jim Bob lumbered down like a friendly mountain. I asked him a few questions, gave them a Xerox of one of the dodo pictures, left them addresses and phone numbers where they could reach me. Then into the rent-a-car, off to Water Valley, acting on information Jennifer Crate gave me. I went to the postmaster's house at Water Valley. She was getting ready for bed. I asked questions. She got on the phone. I bothered people until 1 in the morning. Then back into the trusty rent-a-car. On to Memphis as the moon came up on my right. Interstate 55 was a glass ribbon before me. WLS from Chicago was on the radio. I hummed along with it. I sang at the top of my voice. A sack full of dodo bones, beaks, feet, and eggshell fragments kept me company on the front seat. Did you know a museum once traded an entire blue whale skeleton for one of a dodo? Driving. The dance of the dodos. I used to have a vision sometimes. I had it long before this madness came up. I can close my eyes and see it by thinking hard. But it comes to me most often, most vividly, when I am reading and listening to classical music. especially Pachelbel's Canon in D. It is near dusk in The Hague, and the light is that of Frans Hals of Rembrandt. The Dutch royal family and their guests eat and talk quietly in the great dining hall. Guards with halberds and pikes stand in the corners of the room. The family is arranged around the table. A king, queen, some princesses, a prince, a couple of other children, an invited noble or two. Servants come out with plates and cups, but they do not intrude. On a raised platform at one end of the room, an orchestra plays dinner music. A harpsichord, viola, cello, 3 violins and woodwinds. One of the royal dwarfs sits on the edge of the platform, his foot slowly rubbing the back of one of the dogs sleeping near him. As the music of Pachelbel's Canon D swells and rolls through the hall, one of the dodos walks in clumsily, stops, tilts its head, its eyes bright as a pool of tar, sways a little, lifts its foot tentatively, then another, rocks back and forth in time with the cello. The violins swirl. The dodo begins to dance, its great ungainly body now graceful. It is joined by the other 2 dodos who come into the hall, all 3 in a sort of circle. The harpsichord begins its counterpoint. The 4th dodo, the white one from Réunion, comes from its place under the table and joins the circle with the others. It is most graceful of all, making complete turns where the others only sway and dip on the edge of the circle they have formed. The music rises in volume. The first violinist sees the dodos and nods to the kings, but he and the others at the table have already seen. They are still silent, transfixed. Even the servants stand still, bowls, pots, and kettles in their hands forgotten. Around the dodos dance with bobs and weaves of their ugly heads. The white dodo dips, takes half a step, pirouettes on one foot, circles again. Without a word, the King of Holland takes the hand of the Queen, and they come around the table, children before the spectacle. They join in the dance, waltzing, anachronism, among the dodos, while the family, the guests, the soldiers watch and nod in time with the music. Then the vision fades, and the afterimage of a flickering fireplace and a dodo remains. The dodo and its kindred came by ships to the ports of civilized men. The first we have record of is that of Captain Van Neck, who brought back 2 in 1599, one for the King of Holland and one which found its way through Cologne to the menagerie of Emperor Rudolph II. This royal aviary was at Schloss Neugebau, near Vienna. It was here the first paintings of the dumb old birds were done by Georg and his son Jacob Hofnagel between 1602 and 1610. They painted it among more than 90 species of birds, which kept the emperor amused. Another Dutch artist named Royland Savary, as someone said, made a career out of the dodo. He drew and painted them many times, and was no doubt personally fascinated by them. Obsessed even. Early on, the paintings are consistent. The later ones have inaccuracies. This implies he worked from life first, then from memory, as his model went to that place soon to be reserved for all its species. One of his drawings has 2 of the Rhaphidae scrambling for some goody on the ground. His works are not without charm. Another Dutch artist, they seem to sprout up like mushrooms after a spring rain, named Peter Withoos, also stuck dodos in his paintings, sometimes in odd and exciting places, wandering around during their owners' music lessons, or with Adam and Eve in some Edenic idyll. The most accurate representation, we are assured, comes from half a world away from the religious and political turmoil of the seafaring Europeans. There's an Indian miniature painting of the dodo, which now rests in a museum in Russia. The dodo could have been brought by the Dutch or Portuguese in their travels to Goa and the coast of the Indian subcontinent, or they could have been brought centuries before by the Arabs who plied the Indian Ocean in their triangular sailcraft, and who may have discovered the Mascarenes before the Europeans cranked themselves up for the First Crusade. At one time early in my bird fascination days, after I stopped killing them with BB guns but before I began to work for a scholarship, I once sat down and figured out where all the dodos had been. 2 with Van Neck in 1599, one to Holland, one to Austria. Another was in Count Solms Park in 1600. An account speaks of one in Italy, one in Germany, several to England, 8 or 9 to Holland. William Botenko von Horn knew of one shipped to Europe in 1640, another in 1685, which he said was also painted by Dutch artists. 2 were mentioned as being kept in Surat House in India as pets, perhaps one of which is the one in the painting. Being charitable and considering several to mean at least 3, it means 20 dodos in all. There had to be more, when boatloads had been gathered at the time. What do we know of the Dinim birds? A few ship's logs, some accounts left by travelers and colonists. The English were fascinated by them. Sir Hayman Lestrange, a contemporary of Pepys, saw exhibited a dodar from the island of Mauritius. It is not able to fly, being so big. One was stuffed when it died and was put in the Museum Tredescantum in South Lambeth. It eventually found its way into the Ashmolean Museum. It grew ratty and was burned, all but a leg in the head, in 1750. By then there were no more dodos, but nobody had realized that yet. Francis Willoughby got to describe it before its incineration. Earlier, old Carolus Clusius in Holland studied the one in Council's Park. He collected everything known about the Rhaphidae, describing a dodo-leg Pieter Paul kept in his natural history cabinet in Exoticarium Libri Decem in 1605, 8 years after their discovery. Francois Leglois, a Huguenot who lived on Réunion for some years, published an account of his travels in which he mentioned the dodos. It was published in 1690 after the Mauritius dodo was extinct, and included the information that some of the males weigh 45 pounds. One egg, much bigger than that of a goose, is laid by the female. It takes 7 weeks hatching time. The Abbe Pingre visited the Mascarenes in 1761. He saw the last of the Rodriguez solitaires and collected what information he could about the dead Mauritius and Réunion members of the genus. After that, only memories of the colonists and some scientific debate as to where the Rhaphidae belonged in the great taxonomic scheme of things, some said pigeons, some said rails, were left. Even this nitpicking ended. The dodo was forgotten. When Lewis Carroll wrote Alice in Wonderland in 1865, most people thought he invented the dodo. The service station I called from in Memphis was busier than a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. Between bings and dings of the bell, I finally realized the call had gone through. The guy who answered was named Selvage. I got nowhere with him. He mistook me for a real estate agent, then a lawyer. Now he was beginning to think I was some sort of con man. I wasn't doing too well either. I hadn't slept in 2 days. I must have sounded like a speed freak. My only progress was that I found Miss Annie Mae Gudger, childhood playmate of Jolene Jimson, was now, and had been, the respected Miss Annie Mae Radwin. This guy Selvage must have been a secretary or toady or something. We were having a conversation comparable to that between a shrieking macaw and a pile of mammoth bones. Then there was another click on the line. "Young man," said the other voice, an old woman's voice, southern, very refined, but with a hint of the hills in it. "Yes? Hello, hello?" "Young man, you say you talked to a Jolene somebody. Do you mean Jolene Smith?" "Hello? Yes? Miss Radwin. Miss Annie Mae Radwin, who used to be Gudger. She lives in Austin now, Texas. She used to live near Water Valley, Mississippi. Austin's where I'm from. Young man," asked the voice again, "are you sure you haven't been put up to this by my hateful sister Alma?" "No, ma'am. I met a woman named Jolene." "I'd like to talk to you, young man," said the voice. Then offhandedly, "Give him directions to get here, Selvage." Click. I cleaned out my mouth as best I could in the service station restroom, tried to shave with an old clogged Gillette disposable in my knapsack, and succeeded in gaping up my jawline. I changed into a clean pair of jeans, the only other shirt I had with me, and combed my hair. I stood in front of the mirror. I still looked like the dog's lunch. The house reminded me of Presley's mansion, which was somewhere in the neighborhood. From a shack on the side of a Mississippi hill to this, in 40 years. There are all sorts of ways of making it. I wondered what Annie Mae Gudger's had been. Luck? Predation? Divine intervention? Hard work? Trover and Replevin? Selvage led me toward the sunroom. I felt like Philip Marlowe going to meet a rich client. The house was filled with that furniture built sometime between the turn of the century and the 1950s, the ageless kind. It never looks never looks ratty, and every chair is comfortable. I think I was expecting some formidable woman with sleeve blotters and a green eye shade hunched over a roll-top desk with piles of paper whose acceptance or rejection meant life or death for thousands. Who I met was a charming lady in a green pantsuit. She was in her 60s. her hair still a straw-wheat color. It didn't look dyed. Her eyes were blue as my first-grade teacher's had been. She was wiry and looked as if the word fat was not in her vocabulary. "Good morning, Mr. Lindbergh." She shook my hand. "Would you like some coffee? You look as if you could use it." "Yes, thank you." "Please sit down." She indicated a white wicker chair at the glass table. A serving tray with coffee pot, cups, tea bags, croissants, napkins, and plates lay on the tabletop. After I swallowed half a cup of coffee at a gulp, she said, "What you wanted to see me about must be important." "Sorry about my manners," I said. "I know I don't look it, but I'm a biology assistant at the University of Texas, an ornithologist, working on my master's. I met Miss Jolene Jimson 2 days ago." "How is Jolene? I haven't seen her in, oh Lord, it must be under 50 years. The time gets away." "She seemed to be fine. I only talked to her half an hour or so. That was—" "And you've come to see me about?" About some of the poultry your family used to raise when they lived near Water Valley." She looked at me a moment. Then she began to smile. "Oh, you mean the ugly chickens," she said. I smiled. I almost laughed. I knew what Oedipus must have gone through. It is now 4:30 in the afternoon. I am sitting at the downtown Motel 6 in Memphis. I have to make a phone call and get some sleep and catch a plane. Annie Mae Gudger Radwin talked for 4 hours, answering my questions, setting me straight on family history, having Selvage hold all her calls. The main problem was that Annie Mae ran off in 1928, the year before her father got his big break. She went to Yazoo City and by degrees and stages worked her way northward to Memphis, and her destiny is the widow of a rich mercantile broker. But I get ahead of myself. Grandfather Gudger used to be the overseer for Colonel Crisby on the main plantation near Macomb, Mississippi. There was a long story behind that, bear with me. Colonel Crisby himself was a scion of a seafaring family with interest in both the cedars of Lebanon, almost all cut down for masts for His Majesty's and others' navies, and Egyptian cotton. Also teas, spices, and any other salable commodity which came their way. When Colonel Crisby's grandfather reached his majority in 1802, he waved goodbye to the Atlantic Ocean at Charleston, South Carolina, and stepped westward into the forest. When he stopped, he was in the middle of the Chickasaw Nation, where he opened a trading post and introduced slaves to the Indians. And he prospered, and begat Colonel Crisby's father, who sent back to South Carolina for everything his father owned. Everything. Slaves, wagons, horses, cattle, guinea fowl, peacocks, and dodos, which everyone thought as atrociously ugly poultry of some kind, one of the seafaring uncles having bought them off a French merchant in 1721. I surmise these were white dodos from Réunion, unless they had been from even earlier stock. The dodo of Mauritius was already extinct by then. All this stuff was herded out west to the trading posts in the midst of Chickasaw Nation. Tribes around there were of the Confederation of the Dancing Rabbits. And Colonel Crisby's father prospered, and so did the guinea fowl and the dodos. Then Andrew Jackson came along and marched the Dancing Rabbits up off the Trail of Tears to the heaven of Oklahoma. And Colonel Crisby's father begat Colonel Crisby, and put the trading post in the hands of others, and moved his plantation westward still to Macomb. Everything prospered but Colonel Crisby's father, who died, and the dodos, with occasional losses to the avenging weasel and the egg-sucking dog, reproduced themselves also. Then along came Granddaddy Gudger, a Simon Legree role model who took care of the plantation while Colonel Crisby raised 10 companies of men and marched off to fight the War of Southern Independence. Colonel Crisby came back to the Macomb plantation earlier than most, he having stopped much of the same volley of Minnie balls that caused Commander General Beauregard Hanlon on a promontory bluff during the siege of Vicksburg. He wasn't dead, but death hung around the place like a gentlemanly bill collector for a month. The colonel languished, went slap-dap crazy, and freed all his slaves the week before he died. The war lasted another 2 years after that. Not having any slaves, he didn't need an overseer. Then comes the Faulkner part of the tale, straight out of As I Lay Dying, with the Gudger family returning to the area of the Water Valley before there was a Water Valley, moving through the demoralized and tattered displaced persons of the South, driving their dodos before them. For Colonel Crisby had given them to his former overseer for his faithful service. Also followed the story of the bloody murder of Granddaddy Gudger at the hands of the Freedmen's Militia during the rising of the first clan, the trials and tribulations of Daddy Gudger in the years between 1880 and 1910, when he was between the ages of 4 and 34. Alma and Annie Mae were second and fifth of Daddy Gudger's brood, born 3 years apart. They seemed to have hated each other from the very first time Alma looked into little Annie Mae's crib. They were kids by Daddy Gudger's second wife. His desperation had killed the first, and their father was already on his 6th career. He had been a lumberman, a stump preacher, a plowman for hire, till his mules broke out in Farsi buds and died of the glanders, a freight hauler, until his horses died of overwork and the hardware store repossessed the wagon, a politician's roadie, until the politician lost the election. When Alma and Annie Mae were born, he was failing as a sharecropper. Somehow Gudger had made it through the Depression of 1898 as a boy, was too poor after that to notice much more about the economics and the price of a beech-nut tobacco at the store. Alma and Annie Mae fought, and helped none at all that Alma, being the oldest daughter, was both her mother and father's darling. Annie Mae's life was the usual unwanted poor white trash child's hell. She vowed early to run away, and recognized her ambition at 13. All this I learned this morning. Jolene Smith Jimson was Annie Mae's only friend in those days, from a family even poorer than the Gudgers, but somehow there was food and occasional odd job. And the dodos. My family hated those old birds, said the cultured Annie Mae Radwin, nee Gudger, in the solarium. He always swore he was going to get rid of them someday, but never seemed to get around to it. I think there was more to it than that, but they were so much trouble. We always had to keep 'em penned up at night and go check for their eggs. They wandered off to lay them and forgot where they were. Sometimes no new ones were born at all in a year, and they got so ugly. Once a year, terrible looking, like they were going to die. All their feathers fell off. They looked like they had mange or something. And the whole front of their beaks fell off, or worse, hung halfway on for a week or two. They looked like big old naked pigeons. After that, they'd lose weight down to 20 or 30 pounds before their new feathers grew back. We were always having to kill foxes that got after 'em in the turkey house, so we called their roost the turkey house. And we found their eggs all sucked out by cats and dogs. They were so stupid we had to drive them into their roost at night, and I don't think they could have found it standing 10 feet from it. She looked at me. I think much as my father hated them, they meant something to him. As long as he hung on to them, he knew his good Granddaddy Gudger. You may not know it, but there was a certain amount of family pride about Granddaddy Gudger. At least in my father's eyes, his rapid fall in the world has a sort of grandeur to it. He'd gone from a relatively high position in the old order and maintained some grace and stature after the emancipation, and though he lost everything, he managed to keep those ugly old chickens the colonel had given him as a sort of symbol. And as long as he had them, too, my daddy thought himself as good as his father. He kept his dignity, even when it didn't have anything else. I asked what happened to them. She didn't know, but told me who did and where I could find her. That's why I'm going to make a phone call. Hello, Dr. Courtney! Dr. Courtney, this is Paul, Memphis, Tennessee. It's too long to go into. No, of course not. Not yet, but I've got evidence. What? Okay, how do trochanters, coracoids, tarsometatarsi, and beak sheets sound? From their hen house. Where else? Where would you keep your dodos then? Sorry, I haven't slept in a couple days. I need some help. Yes, money. Lots of money. Cash, $300 maybe. Western Union, Memphis, Tennessee. Whichever one's close to the airport. Airport, I need the department to set up reservations to Mauritius for me. No, not wild goose chase, wild dodo chase. Tame dodo chase. I know there aren't any dodos on Mauritius. I know that. I could explain. I know it'll mean a couple of grand if... But, look, Dr. Courtney, do you want your picture in Scientific American, or don't you? I am sitting in the airport cafe in Port Louis, Mauritius. It is now 3 days later, 5 days since that fateful morning my car wouldn't start. God bless the Sears Die Hard people. I have slept sitting up in a plane seat, on and off, different planes, different seats, for 24 hours. Kennedy to Paris, Paris to Cairo, Cairo to Madagascar. Felt like a brand new man when I got here. Now I feel like an infinitely sadder and wiser brand new man. I've just returned from the hateful Sister Alma's house in the exclusive section of Port Louis, where all the French and British officials used to live. Courtney will get his picture in Scientific American. Me too, all right. There'll be newspaper stories and talk shows for a few weeks for me. I'm sure Annie Mae Gudger Radwin on one side of the world and Alma Chandler Gudger Moliere on the other will come for their share of the glory. I am putting away a cup after cup of coffee. The plane back to Tananarive leaves in about an hour. I plan to sleep all the way back to Cairo, to Paris, to New York, pack up my bag of bones, sleep back to Austin. Before me on the table is a packet of documents, clippings, and photographs. I have come half the world for this. I gaze from the package out the window across Port Louis to the bulk of Mount Pieter Booth, which overshadows the city and its famous racecourse. Perhaps I should do something symbolic. Cancel my flight, climb the mountain, and look down man and all his handiworks. Take a picture of martinis with me. Sit in the bright semi-tropical sunlight. It's early dry winter here. Drink the martini slowly, toasting Snuffo, god of extinction. Here's one for the great auk. This is for the Carolina parakeet. Mud in your eye, Patchender pigeon. This one's for the heath hen. Most importantly, here's one for each of the Mauritius dodo, the white dodo of Réunion, the Réunion solitaire, the Rodriguez solitaire. Here's to the Raffidae, great Didine birds that you were. Maybe I'll do something just as productive, like climbing Mount Peter Booth and pissing into the wind. How symbolic. The story of the dodo ends where it began, on this very island. Life imitates cheap art, like the Xerox of a bad novel. I never expected to find dodos still alive here. This is the one place they would have been noticed. I still can't believe Alma Chandler Gudger Moliere could have lived here 25 years and not know about the dodo, never set foot inside the Port Louis Museum, where they have skeletons and a stuffed replica the size of your little brother. After Annie Mae ran off, the Gudger family found itself prospering at a time the rest of the country was going to hell. It was 1929. Gudger delved into politics again and backed a man who worked for Theodore's sure two-handed sword of God Bilbo, who connections everywhere, who introduced him to Huey Kingfish Long, just after that gentleman lost the Louisiana governor's election one of the times. Gudger stumped around Mississippi, getting up steam for a long share wealth plan, before it even had a name. The upshot was that a long machine in Louisiana knew a rabble-rouser when it saw one, and invited his family, all expenses paid, start working for the Kingfish at the unbelievable salary of $62.50 a week, which prospect was like turning a hog loose under a persimmon tree. For it could say backwoods messiah, the Gudger clan was on its way back to the land of pelicans, Grafton, and Mardi Gras. Almost, but I'll get to that. Daddy Gudger prospered out of that proportion with his abilities, but many men did that during the Depression. First a little, thence to more, he rose in bureaucratic and political circles of the state, dying rich and well hated with his fingers in all the pies. Alma Chandler Gudger became a debutante, she says Robert Penn Warren put her in his book, and met and married Jean-Carl Moliere, only heir to rice, indigo, and sugarcane growers. They had a happy wedded life, moving first to the West Indies, later to Mauritius, where the family sugarcane holdings were one of the largest on the island. Jean-Carl died in 1959. Alma was his only survivor. So local family makes good. Poor sharecropping Mississippi people turn out to have a father dying with a smile on his face, and two daughters who between them own a large portion of the planet. I opened the envelope before me. Miss Alma Moliere had listened politely to my story. The university had called ahead and arranged an introduction through the director of the Port Louis Museum, who knew Miss Moliere socially, and told me what she could remember. Then she sent a servant out to one of the storehouses, large as a duplex, and he and two others came boxes of clippings, scrapbooks, and family photos. I haven't looked at any of this since we left St. Thomas, she said. Let's go through it together. Most of it was about the rise of Susan Gudger. There's not many pictures of us before we came to Louisiana. We were so frighteningly poor then, hardly anyone knew we had a camera. Oh, look, here's one of Annie Mae. I thought I threw those out after Mama died. This is the photograph. It must have been taken about 1927. Annie Mae is wearing some unrecognizable piece of clothing that approximates a dress. She leans on a hoe, smiling a snaggletooth smile. She looks to be 10 or 11. Her eyes are half hidden by the shadow of the brim of a gaped straw hat she wears. The earth she's standing on barefoot has been newly turned. Beside her is one corner of the house, and the barn beyond has its upper hay windows open. Out of focus people are at work there. A few feet behind her, a huge male dodo is pecking at something on the ground. The front 2/3 of it shows, back to the stupid wings and the edge of the upcurved tail feathers. One foot is in the photo, having just scratched something, possibly an earthworm, in the new plowed clods. Judging by its darkness, is the gray or Mauritius dodo. The photograph is not very good, one of those 3.5 by 5 jobs box cameras used to take. Already I can see this one, and the blow-up of the dodo, taking up a double-page spread in Scientific American. Alma told me around then they were down to 6 or 7 of the ugly chickens, 2 whites, the rest gray-brown. Besides this photo, 2 clippings are in the package, one from the Bruce Banner Times, the other from the Oxford newspaper. Both are columns by the same woman dealing with doings in Water Valley. Both mention the Gudger family moving from the area to seek its fortune in the swampy state to the west, and telling how they will be missed. Then there's a yellow clipping from the front page of the Oxford newspaper with a small story about the Gudger farewell party in Water Valley the Sunday before, dated October 19th, 1929. There's a handbill in the package advertising the Gudger family farewell party, Sunday, October 15th, 1929. Come one, come all. The people in Louisiana who sent expense money to move Daddy Gudger must have overestimated the cost by an exponential factor. I said as much. No, Alma Moliere said. There was a lot, but it wouldn't have made any difference. Daddy Gudger was like Thomas Wolfe and knew a shine golden opportunity when he saw one. Win, lose, or draw, he was never coming back there again. He would have thrown some kind of soiree, whether there had been money for it or not. Besides, people were much more sociable then, you mustn't forget. I asked her how many people came. 400 or 500, she said. There's some pictures here somewhere. We searched a while. Then we found them. Another 30 minutes to my flight. I'm not worried sitting here. I'm the only passenger, and the pilot is sitting at the table next to mine talking to an RAF man. Life is much slower and nicer on these colonial islands, you mustn't forget. I look at the other 2 photos in the package. One is of some men playing horseshoes and washer toss, while kids, dogs, and women look on. It was evidently taken from the east end of the house looking west. Everyone must have had to walk the last mile of the old Gudger place. Other groups of people stand talking. Some men in shirt sleeves and suspenders stand with their heads thrown back. A snappy story, no doubt, just told. One girl looks directly at the camera from close up. Shyly, her finger in her mouth. She's about 5. It looks like any snapshot of a family reunion which could have been taken anywhere, anytime. The clothing marks it as 1920s. Courtney will get his money's worth. I'll write the article, make phone calls, plan the talk show tour to coincide with the publication. Then I'll get some rest. I'll be a normal person again, get a degree, spend my time wading through the jungles after animals which will be dead in another 20 years anyway. Who cares? The whole thing will just be another media event, just this year's big deal. It'll be nice getting normal again. I can read books, see movies, wash my clothes at the laundromat, listen to Jonathan Richman on the stereo. I can study and become an authority on some minor matter or other. I can go to museums, see all the wonderful dead things there. That's the memory picture, said Alma. They always took them at big things like this back in those days. Everybody who was there would line up and pose for the camera. Only we couldn't fit everybody in, so we had 2 made. This is the one with us in it. The house is dwarfed by people. All sizes, shapes, dresses, and ages. Kids and dogs in front, women next, then men at the back. The only exceptions are the bearded patriarchs seated towards the front with the children. Men whose eyes face the camera, but whose heads are still ringing with something Nathan Bedford Forrest said to them one time on a smoke-filled field. This photograph is from another age. You can recognize Daddy and Mrs. Gudger if you've seen their photograph before. Alma pointed herself out to me. But the reason I took the photograph is in the foreground. Tables have been built out of sawhorses with doors and boards nailed across them. They extend the entire width of the photograph. They are covered with food, more food than you can imagine. We started cooking 3 days before. So did the neighbors. Everybody brought something, said Alma. It's like an entire Safeway had been cooked and set out to cool. Hams, quarters of beef, chickens by the tubful, quail in mounds, rabbit, butter beans by the bushel, yams, Irish potatoes, an acre of corn, eggplant, peas, turnip greens, butter in 5-pound molds, cornbread and biscuits, gallon cans of molasses, red-eye gravy by the pot, and 5 huge birds, twice as big as legs capped like for Thanksgiving, drumsticks the size of Schwarzenegger's biceps, whole roasted, lying on their backs on platters as large as cocktail tables. The people in the crowd sure look hungry. "We ate for days," said Alma. I already have the title for the Scientific American article. It's going to be called "The Dodo is Still Dead." The end.